I think we're ready to begin. First off, thank you everyone for coming for this conversation. I know that it's not easy to get started in advocacy sometimes, so hopefully today you'll learn a little bit more about how to get started and some useful tips on the best ways to communicate. I am very thankful for our panelists for joining us today. First off, we have Curtis Vallier, who's up in Wisconsin. He is the CEO and co-founder of Battlecorn Care Packages, but more importantly, he's JC's dad. He'll be talking a little bit more about his family. We also have Colin Raybin, who is Charlie's mom and an advocate in her own right. Charlie has also been involved in advocacy work for us, and I'm sure Colin will touch on that. We also have Eric Kim, who's a senior legislative assistant with Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. And then later in the Q&A session, we will also have Nick Pottebaum, who is the health policy advisor for Chuck Grassley, Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa. So let's start things off by just talking briefly a little bit about our priorities in September. September, as you know, is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And on the federal level, we're looking at a handful of things. We're looking at proposed budget cuts to the NIH and NCI. We're also looking at a huge issue for our community right now is drug shortages. We have quite a number of drugs that are being used for some of our most aggressive forms of brain cancer, and even some of our low-grade gliomas that are in shortage right now. And the Alliance for Childhood Cancer just did a survey of the hospitals that we work with, and we found that over 80% of children's hospitals are experiencing some sort of drug shortage right now. And it's putting clinicians and care teams in really difficult positions when it comes to serving their patients. So right now, we are trying to make sure that children remain a part of that discussion as policymakers down in Washington, D.C. try to solve that issue. And lastly, we are also focused on the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act, which would cut through bureaucratic red tape and any delays that children traveling across state lines may experience. We will have Nick talk a little bit more about that since Senator Grassley is the person that introduced that bill in the Senate. So why don't we start off first with Curtis. Curtis, if you could just share a little bit about you and what you've done in advocacy and maybe a little bit more about your family.
Sure. So in January 30th of 2020, our daughter JC was diagnosed with choroid plexus carcinoma, which is an extremely rare form of brain cancer that I'm sure most people haven't even heard of. And at that time, her mother and I did not know really what to do, what the fight that we were in for, and the journey we were going to be on. We stayed in the hospital in the very initial time for 12 days. And after that initial stay, 3 brain surgeries, our daughter walked herself out of the hospital, and we thought, we've beat this thing. We're on the path here. She's going to be that miracle child. Unfortunately, cancer is it's unstable. You don't really know what's going to happen the next day and what's going to happen the next minute. So for us, she went through her radiation treatments, and then we decided not to do chemo with our doctor's advice because she was responding so well. Unfortunately, in September of 2020, she relapsed, and that was really tough on her with the chemos and the treatments that she had to go through. But she fought very hard for 520 days. And unfortunately, on September 3rd of 2021, we lost her. Since that day, that has really been where the advocacy started. We started Battlecorn when she was going through treatments because it was a way to give back to everybody that had given to us when we were going through treatments with the packages and getting mail, things that I know kids love. And I know she lit up when she saw something come with her name on it and she could open it. And so we decided to give back. We did that all through her treatments. And anytime she felt well, that's what she did. She was there with us, putting packages together for other children. She was always thinking of the other person and not herself. When she passed away, we started advocating extremely hard and extremely loud with our politicians here, trying to make a change so that our friends and family and people that we had met on this journey wouldn't have to feel what we had to feel, and that other people would not have to go through what we did. So getting into advocacy was something that was, I guess you could call it my therapy. It was a way that I could help other people by channeling my grief, my anger, even into something positive. And that's why I decided to do it 24/7 and to make it a mission of mine to complete the mission she left here for us. So to this day, and actually up until Saturday, we had, with packages and with raising money for charities and things of that nature, our financial impact to the pediatric cancer world was about $65,000. After Saturday, that's a little bit higher now. We were able to donate to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation $25,000 after our event on Saturday. And that means the world to us, because that means hopefully it can make a massive difference in how these kids can just be kids, and the treatments and the research that can make a difference into the future. And that's our hope and prayer. And we'll do it every year and every day, because we know as parents and as advocates, we have to shoulder the weight of the change. And we learn that personally every single day. When my wife and I we've walked the halls of Madison many times, knocking on congressmen and representative and assembly doors, trying to get answers and trying to make change. And we'll do it every day until something happens. So that's a little bit kind of an insight as to us and our family. Our daughter is forever 8 years old, but she will forever be our inspiration to why we continue to do this. And she always lets us know that she's here. And we will keep doing this until I finally see her name on the top of legislation that will help other people, because that's who she was.
Thank you, Curtis. And we so appreciate you and your family for what you've done to honor JC. And as a fellow bereaved dad, that I think the world of what you're doing, and I'm just so grateful that you're part of what we're doing. Colin, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about your family and what you've done in the advocacy space.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Raybin, and I'm the proud mom of a 12-year-old boy who has a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma in his cerebellum and his pons. My son was diagnosed when he was 8 in 2019, and since that time, he has endured brain surgery, which resulted in a partial resection due to the involvement of the remaining tumor in his brainstem and cranial nerves, and he's done 13 months of weekly standard chemo. He's now on a watch and wait approach. Treatment and tumor left him with right side weakness, deafness, and facial numbness, but through tremendous effort, he learned how to walk again, and he learned how to play the piano again. When our son was on treatment, I was just putting one foot in front of the other. But when he went off treatment in 2021, I wanted to give back to the amazing community of doctors, researchers, scientists, therapists, and foundations like PBTF that had given so much to us. But I really felt like I didn't know where to start. So the first thing I did when my son went off treatment was to reach out to every doctor and nurse practitioner who had provided care or a second opinion for our son. Basically, anyone I had an email for, I emailed. I told them I wanted to give back, and I asked how I could help. Dr. Nicolaitis at NYU Hospital had given us a second opinion, and he connected me with Amy Weinstein at PBTF. He said, call Amy, she'll know what to do. And Amy has been tremendous at getting me involved in meaningful work. I was nominated by Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation and have served for the last 2 years as a consumer reviewer of pediatric brain tumor research for the Department of Defense congressionally directed medical research funds. So this program is a phenomenal program that's the result of grassroots efforts by breast cancer survivors and advocates to get funding from the Department of Defense to support cancer research, which in and of itself is hugely inspiring to me that the work of a grassroots group of people can be so impactful. This has been one of the most fulfilling ways I feel like I've been able to advocate for pediatric brain tumor children. The DoD funds research in many types of cancer, but pediatric brain tumors are one of the topic areas that has its own review panels and allocated funding. This is a tremendous coup for the pediatric brain tumor community, and the fact that it is a topic area is a direct result of advocacy efforts by families and foundations just like us. My role is to determine the impact these research projects would have on the pediatric brain tumor community based on my experience as a caregiver. So the DoD is always looking for more reviewers, both scientific as well as consumer. If this is something that sounds interesting to you, please reach out to me or to PBTF about ways that you can get involved, as well as how you can help spread the word. This spring, I worked with Amy Weinstein again and the Department of Defense to create a webinar encouraging scientists to apply for funding for pediatric brain tumor research through the DoD. The DoD tends to give, by percentage, a higher percentage of research funding to pediatric brain tumor research than other funding types do. We would love it if you would help share this information with your treatment teams and encourage them to apply for funding. Another way I've been involved in advocacy work came out of noticing that my son was getting what I would call a more whole patient treatment than some of the other families we were in treatment with. For example, we had a team that consisted of an oncologist, a neurosurgeon, a neuropsychologist for neuropsych testing, a separate neuropsychologist who treated our son as a clinical psychologist, and also helped my husband and I to understand which behaviors were the result of a brain tumor and/or treatment, and which were not, as well as how to address them. We had an educational liaison to help with school, a speech therapist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a GI doctor, an ENT, an audiologist, endocrinologist, ophthalmologist, probably more I'm forgetting. But when I would talk to other moms in clinic who were struggling with all the things that we are all struggling with, I would be surprised to learn that a referral, for example, to a neuropsychologist had not been made. This led me to start asking a lot of questions. I asked for a meeting with our son's neuropsychologist and his physical medicine rehab doctor to ask why our son had such comprehensive care while others did not, and what I could do to help. One thing they conjectured was that if a patient can literally walk out of the hospital after surgery, they might not get referrals to rehab that tend to generate other referrals. Whereas our son spent several months in inpatient rehab learning how to use the right side of his body again, and those weeks led to comprehensive referrals. As a way to address this inconsistency of care, our son's neuropsychologist and physical medicine and rehab doctor recommended I join what's called the Pediatric Hematology Oncology Advisory Council, or POAC, at University of Michigan, to talk about the importance of whole patient care to our son's ongoing treatment, which I did. So POAC is an organization of caregivers like me, as well as nurses, doctors, and hospital administrators. My goal was to talk to the HEMONC side about how vital the PMR side was, and to try to speak up for other families who did not know what services they were missing. I also had the benefit of having been through treatment with our son at 2 different hospitals, as we had to change treatment centers when we moved 3 miles north across state lines. I wanted to help address some things that were done better at the first hospital than the second, and vice versa. I'm sure many other hospitals have POACs, or sometimes they're called PFACs, which is like Parent and Family Advisory Councils, or advisory councils for the HEMONC departments. What I found surprising was how few brain tumor families were involved in this. Most of them were leukemia survivors and families, or other types of blood cancers. And it impressed upon me the need for brain tumor families in these groups, because we are not like other families. Brain tumor families are different. Our kids' needs are different, and these groups need parents like us to be involved to represent our unique needs. If you're interested in joining your hospital's POAC, I would recommend reaching out to your oncologist or nurse practitioner. They should know how to get involved. Also, the hospital's Office of Patient Experience should have a way to get involved and become an official hospital volunteer. And if your hospital does not have a POAC, it's an excellent way to create communication among departments within the hospital to help our kids get their needs met. Our son's neuropsychologist introduced me to something called TOPS, which stands for Teen Online Problem Solving through Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This helps teens problem solve with post-treatment challenges. They needed a parent to review the website and give feedback, and because I had approached my son's neuropsychologist to say, what can I do to help, she thought of me. I spent time reviewing the website, which is awesome, by the way, and it's a tremendous resource for teens and their families. Now I'm on the advisory board to this PCORI-funded project through Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I attend a couple meetings a year, but mostly I try to help spread the word about TOPS. I really believe in this program. I think it both validates challenges as well as provides concrete tools for addressing these challenges that I've not found elsewhere. Again, I came by this opportunity by asking my son's treating psychologist how I could help. I've done a few other things, and all of them are pretty much the result of reaching out to anyone I can find and saying, I'm here, I'm eager, what can I do? I'm on the Family Ambassadors Board of the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation, which I'm thrilled about. I've done things like review a parent guidebook, attend a session on how to help families with educational needs like IEP and 401 plans, and review potential funding topics for a grant. I've met like-minded parents, and I'm hopeful about making a positive difference. Last year, I moderated a panel on clinical trials at the Brainstorm Summit, which is coming up in the fall in Washington, D.C., as the parent of a brain tumor patient. I learned so much by being on this panel. I continue to be amazed at how much there is to learn, and I feel the more I learn, the better prepared I will be at the next turn of events with our son. Now, there's a lot that I don't do. So my husband is a journalist by trade turned public relations professional, and he has insisted from day one that we not put our son's story out there. He felt strongly that once something is in print, you can never get it back, and he wanted our son to be able to tell his own story on his own terms someday when he was old enough to make that choice. That said, we haven't done anything public with our son's name, and we have turned down marketing opportunities that would use our son's story to raise money and awareness. I'm not sure if it's the right answer, but it's the right now answer. I try to always participate in my advocacy work in my own name without using my son's name. He doesn't have autonomy in a lot these days, but I want him to have autonomy in how he shares his story. He was 8 when we got started with treatment, and now he's 12, so things are changing. So now my son has also gotten involved in advocacy work, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what his work looks like and how it's different from mine. So how my son got involved was that I participated virtually in 2022 in the Alliance for Childhood Cancer's Action Days and National Brain Tumor Society's Head to the Hill, which, by the way, are excellent ways to participate in advocacy and great ways to get started. There's a virtual Head to the Hill event happening at the end of September. That would be a fantastic way to get your feet wet if you're looking for an opportunity. My son was home from school, and he expressed interest in participating in the call. I got approval from the Head to the Hill team to have my son participate, and that was it. He was great at telling his story. His messaging was profound in that it was coming directly from a pediatric brain tumor patient, and he was called to action. So one of the bills we were calling attention to during the Head to the Hill event was ACACA, which stands for Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act. My son was impressed by the bill's potential to impact so many children fighting cancer. He was so called to action that he made it his make-a-wish to try to get ACACA passed. We've been working with Mike Henry, who's on this call at PBTF, Senator Stabenow, who's our senator from Michigan, as well as Nick Potabom, who is also on this call, from Senator Grassley's office, to go to DC and talk to senators about the importance of the bill. This bill will allow children to use Medicaid, which is federal funding, across state lines to access life-saving treatment, and would have enormous impact on childhood cancer patients and their families. My son's advocacy work has been profoundly meaningful to him. It has helped him bring purpose to all that he has gone through. He even said to me in the car, he almost feels glad he has a brain tumor because now he can make a difference in other kids' lives. And I think that's why I do advocacy work too, to put pain into purpose. So I tried to brainstorm some ways to get involved and opportunities that I see. And what I would say is, ask every person you encounter, how can I help? I reached out to every doctor, every nurse practitioner who had ever provided care for our son or a second opinion. I basically emailed anyone I had contact for. I I reached out to PBTF, which is a fantastic organization, and Mike Henry is tremendous at helping people get involved in advocacy work. He's made a huge, huge difference in our son's life. CBTF is also a great organization to reach out to. I think it's important to remember that not every form of advocacy is right for everyone. You don't have to do it all, but if we all do a little something, we will accomplish a lot. I remember my first call with Amy Weinstein. She said to me, well, Colin, you have to figure out what you want to do. And I remember thinking, well, I want to do everything. But in hindsight, there are some things I enjoy, such as the Department of Defense work. And there are other things that I do not enjoy, such as fundraising. That was great advice Amy gave. Lastly, I think it's important to recognize that we are a small group to begin with, and that not everyone will lean into advocacy work. Your work is very much needed. I always assumed that someone else was doing the work, but time and time again, I continue to recognize that I have a responsibility to lean in. Pediatric brain tumor patients and the families need us, and the fact that you're on this call says you're already on your way. Thanks so much for letting me share my story.
Thank you, Colin. I'm always struck by your family and the work that they do, and kind of the different definitions of advocacy that all of you have. I think it's a great example of all the different ways that folks can get involved in making their voice heard. Eric, I'd love to hear from you. You have a different perspective. You're up on Capitol Hill and you hear from folks like us all the time. Could you just talk a little bit about that? How you became a staffer with Senator McCaul, or Representative McCaul, and your office's experience with the childhood cancer community?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, just want to thank everyone, especially Curtis and Colin, for all the work that you guys do. Just hearing your advocacy work is very impressive, and yeah, so just want to thank you guys and Mike for having me here today. As Mike said, my name is Eric Kim. I am Congressman Mike McCaul's senior legislative assistant. I handle his healthcare portfolio, which much of it has to do with childhood cancer. As you guys may be aware, my boss is very much involved in that space. He helped found the Congressional Childhood Cancer Caucus about a decade and a half ago. So it's one of his big priorities, in addition to him being chairman of House Foreign Affairs. He is very passionate about childhood cancer. He had a friend who passed away when he was a child, and ever since it's just always been on his mind. And there's different needs, as you guys know, not just with the patient, but also in research. Once they're cured, there's lifelong ramifications, care. So we just try to be involved as much as possible and try to reach out and have as many meetings with advocates as we can. Just me personally, I came to DC back in 2013. I was an intern in college, started off as a legislative correspondent and just kind of worked my way up the ladder. And I worked for the National Republican Congressional Committee for about 3 cycles, worked in government affairs, and joined Congressman Mike McCaul's office earlier this Congress. So have a bit of a eclectic experience, just politically, also downtown and here on the Hill. So very, very open to answer any questions that you guys might have. Just from my perspective, I always appreciate advocates who try to build relationships with us. You know, it's not just about short-term needs, but also because the one thing is that there's a lot of turnover on the Hill. And so when I joined the McCaul office, there was a lot of institutional relationships. And so right off the bat, I was able to cultivate relationships pretty quickly, just because they just try to be as helpful as possible, which is a huge help for us. And we respond to people that we trust. And so there's been advocates who worked with my boss and our team for years now, like St. Baldrick's, or, you know, like Nancy Goodman, she's another patient advocate, or a mom of a patient. And so we just been able to get a lot accomplished, just, you know, as a team. And so that's just one thing that I would encourage all of you to do, is to try to build those relationships for the long term, not just focusing on this Congress. It may take numbers of Congresses to get a bill passed. So just understanding that this is sort of a long-term investment, and it should yield benefits. But sorry, what was the other question? I introduced myself, gave a little bit of my perspective.
I think everything that you've said so far has been fantastic. I know that you often hear from advocates within our community. I also know that your office has priorities for our community for the rest of the year and next year. Could you just talk a little bit about what your office is working on that would affect our community?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that segue. So we're pushing really hard on a bill called Give Kids a Chance Act. We introduced it last Congress. Frankly, just kind of ran out of time, and so we introduced it in March of this year. And so, briefly and short, if there's enough evidence that an adult combination drug therapy is biologically similar enough to treat cancer for children, then this bill would direct pediatric studies for that combination. In other words, if there's already a treatment that helps adults, we believe that we should give kids that same chance. So combination therapy trials, as many of you are aware, have been proven successful in adults with cancer, especially preventing relapse. Most pediatric cancer patients that are currently participating in drug trials have relapse cancer. So we believe that this would be a huge advancement for children. And as many of you guys already know, there is an imbalance in terms of research when it comes to childhood cancer with adults. And so we're just trying to create parity with that. The boss has successfully passed a bill in previous Congress. I think it was the 116th. It was called the Race for Children Act, which authorized the FDA to direct drug companies researching single drug therapy for adults. And so this would amend that bill. And that bill has been very successful. There was a government accountability office report that came out saying that there's already 40 pediatric drugs in the pipeline, which is huge. It's unheard of. And so we're hoping that we could also expand that into the combination drug therapy space. I guess if I could just provide some advice, what's very helpful for us is advocates who understand our priorities. And so members tend to respond to district pressure. And also they always try to find ways to, they have their own individual priorities. So if you're able to weave your priorities with the narrative of that member and try to cultivate that, try to be helpful, I think you're going to find yourself to be successful. For example, just for me personally, when I was trying to find co-sponsor for the Give Kids a Chance Act, I was reading a New York Times article about the East Palestine accident with the train. And it said that, there's a risk of cancer for children, especially. And so I reached out to Bill Johnson, who represents that district, talked about how this bill could kind of weave into that narrative that he's trying to help his constituents in light of that disaster. And now he's a co-sponsor. And so there's ways that you could try to find what those target priorities are, whether it's going through their press release, looking through the congressional record, see if there's like any mention that they have family members who suffered cancer, people, and any sort of connection, that would be very helpful. And especially from the districts, members tend to respond. And it's one thing to talk about policy, but it's another when they kind of they see the real life impact. Frankly, not a lot of people are aware about childhood cancer here on the Hill, so I think education is a huge part of that, and especially for people off committee. What I mean by off committee is folks who aren't on the health subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, and trying to build that momentum and energy is. Yeah, it's very helpful in trying to push across any legislative agenda.
Thank you, Eric. And we just had Nick from Senator Grassley's office jump on. Nick, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about how you came to Senator Grassley's office, and maybe a little bit about Senator Grassley's priorities for the childhood cancer space for the rest of the year.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to the other panelists that are joining this. Nick Potabom, I handle Senator Grassley's healthcare. If you're not familiar with Senator Grassley, he is the senior senator from Iowa. Formerly chaired the Finance Committee, which I know just mentioned, the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has similar jurisdictions that the House Committee does, handles Medicare and Medicaid here in the United States Senate. Senator Grassley, for a number of decades, has been very passionate about trying to improve care for kids with special needs, kids with pediatric cancer, et cetera. And so one of those things has been the ACE Kids Act, which I'd be happy to dive into a little bit more. But he's been working hard for decades to improve access to care, including in Medicaid, with the Family Opportunity Act that was passed in the early 2000s, which I'm sure several families and advocates on this Zoom today have probably benefited from. Maybe just a quick about me. Like I said, Nick Potabom, handle Senator Grassley's healthcare. I'm a native Iowan and worked for him for 3+ years, and have been out in Washington, D.C. for a few years, as well as handle healthcare at the state level. So it's great to see you all, and if there are Iowans here, good to have them as well.
Thank you, Nick. We're gonna transition now to answering some questions. We had some folks send in questions in the lead up to this, so I'm just gonna throw them out to a couple of our panelists, and we'll go from there. Colin, you've done so much in the advocacy space, and what in your advocacy work, what's been the most rewarding moment or specific work that you've done for PBTF?
You know, I think probably two things. I really enjoy the Department of Defense work because the Department of Defense funding tends to go at a higher percentage pediatric brain tumor research than other funding sources. And so that feels like, you know, it really is moving the needle forward. So that feels satisfying. And then the other thing that's been most satisfying is seeing my son get excited about advocacy work and to lean in. And Nick, now that you're on this call, you know, he's 12 and he sent Nick an email, or he sent Senator Grassley an email. And the next day he was like, oh my God, he wrote me back. And so this excitement about something that, you know, gives him a sense of purpose for his pain is very cool. So, yeah, I think that's what for me is most fulfilling.
That's great. Curtis, I know that we have a lot of bereaved parents that are thinking about getting into advocacy work, but it can be difficult to really do anything after you've lost your child. What advice would you have for someone in your position that's thinking about getting involved in advocacy work, and you know where they can start?
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, I used the advocacy as a therapy, as the way that I channeled my grief and the way that I channeled my anger and all the other emotions that we go through when we lose a child, blaming everybody else and really trying to find that purpose. And so to get into advocacy work also it's not for everybody. It's definitely it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of effort, but at the same time it's about knowing that there's progress that's going to happen based on what you do, what you go out and do. Your words are going to make a difference. Your fundraising is going to make a difference. Your people are going to listen if you're willing to put in the work. And so my advice is that if you can handle it, I know, again, mentally and spiritually and physically, it's a lot to weigh on a person to do this, and it is not for everybody. But if you can handle it, you want to make a change where you see that change isn't happening, because not a lot of people will kind of listen to you unless they're personally affected. Get out there and do it. and just push and push and push until they're willing to listen to you, or until they tell you to be quiet and then just get a little bit louder, because that's kind of my theory on it. Is you have to make people feel uncomfortable sometimes to make them listen, and our stories unfortunately are uncomfortable. You know, it's been 2 years since we lost our daughter, and I want her here with me. And I've finally come to terms, or come to grips with the fact that she's safer where she is now. She's happy and she's whole again. And that's what drives me, because I know that she's okay. And so when you can come to terms with that, and you can be able to focus on change that you can make if you keep trying, I think that it all works out in the end. And I think it gives you an incredible sense of accomplishment, and that you're holding an honor, and you're doing what they wanted you to do.
Thank you, Curtis. I guess as a follow-up, Eric and Nick, when you hear personal stories from people like Colin and Curtis, how does that help you better understand, you know, the problems that they're presenting to you?
I'm happy to go first. Well, Curtis, thanks for telling your story, and I think, you know, just sort of finer point, a lot of times the work that I do, and similar to Eric's office, there's a lot of papers and computers. And, you know, we try to understand things from a macro standpoint, and what's going on from a policy standpoint, and budget numbers, and the whole process. But I think you really don't understand the challenges until there's a human face to it, and there's a story. And so I think, you know, just the power of telling your story helps us understand, especially if we haven't lived a similar experience. And fortunately, I didn't have to go through that at a personal level, but being able to hear your story helps us understand the challenges you navigated, as well as, you know, things that may have worked well through that process. So I think, as simple as it is, it's adding that human element that is so vital, I think, to policy making.
Yeah, I think that's right. We usually spend most of our time in front of a computer. It's definitely different hearing from patients and from families than from a lobbyist or some representative of a company. It adds more color and texture to the experiences, or just the challenges that you guys face. And some members just respond more acutely to those types of stories. I know for my boss, whenever there's a patient, he wants to listen, and he'll be more than happy to meet with them, rather than just some random lobbyist somewhere. So definitely use your stories as a weapon, you know. And I like what you said. If people don't listen, then make yourself annoying. Like, try to use your story. I mean, that's what you got, you know. And so yeah, it's very helpful.
Yeah, I like to call it being a likable pain in the butt. You like you said, Eric, it's important to build relationships with offices, because they're much more likely to listen to what you have to say if they know you and they trust you. You know, being reactionary isn't usually the best solution. I think being proactive and reaching out to offices early and often, it's helpful for everyone, not just ourselves, but also the staffers, to better understand what are sometimes really, really complex problems. I've seen over and over again in the questions that we've got, you know, really, how do we start? Where do we start? And I think there's not a real straightforward answer to that. I think it's reaching out to folks that can help you, like us at PBTF, and explaining kind of what you're comfortable with. As highlighted by both Curtis and Colin, there are so many different ways that you can get involved and make your voice heard. It's really about us helping you understand, you know, what's best for you, and how to make your voice heard in the most effective way, and in a way that you're most comfortable. So I'd say there are many different opportunities, both on the federal level on the state level. I see a bunch of advocates that are on this call right now that have worked with us on the state level to accomplish some great things. So there's a whole selection of opportunities available to you. Just reach out and we can help you try to get engaged. Curtis, I was interested in meeting your family over this weekend. What do JC's siblings think of your advocacy work, and how do they have any interest in getting into advocacy work?
So she has two older sisters. We have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. And her 17-year-old sister doesn't really focus on it as much, and really doesn't really kind of ignore that it happened, but doesn't let it kind of define her life. So I don't see her getting involved in it that way, and that's fine. That's the way she deals with what we went through, and she kind of just lets her friends be with her and that kind of stuff, and doesn't really talk about it much with us. And that's just kind of been her go-to way of grief, I guess, which again, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. So and our 15-year-old actually is very much involved in everything we do, and with the business, with our events. She'll be at Cure Fest with us, and she is actually going to go into child life as her job. That was something that changed after all this happened. That's what she wants to do now. And if you don't know what child life is, they're the most amazing people on this planet that make it fun almost to be in the hospital in one of the scariest times. And so she has taken to being that kind of our right side. She's right there with us. We go to Madison. She's writing speeches like she did Saturday night. Like, she wants to get involved, and that's cool for us. We encourage it, and again, I wish both of my kids wanted to do it, but we give them the space and the time that they need to be able to get involved at their comfort level. And she just could run away with it. If I decided to stop right now, I think she'd get in my shoes and just keep pounding forward. And that's amazing to us. And I love seeing the younger generation really get into it as much as this advocacy, and whether they're doing it for a family member or doing it for a friend, like our amazing MC from Saturday night. Like, if they're that outspoken at a young age, at 10, 11, 15 years old, that's incredible to me, because that's a time then they're just supposed to be enjoying being a kid and not having responsibilities, but they're focusing their time and effort on other people. And I love that. So we encourage it, and we hope to see more of it.
Colin, kind of along the same lines, do you have any advice for parents whose young children come to them and say, "Hey, I want to get involved in advocacy. I'm interested in this. Can you help me?" Like, where do parents start with that?
So I think the Head to the Hill and the action days are a great place to start, because it's an organized event. Also at Cure Search, they have a way for kids to head to the Hill. And so those are nice ways to tap into something that's already, you can join someone else's efforts. I also think, obviously, Mike, you're a tremendous resource. You've been a great resource for me and my family. But those are, I could think, probably first steps. Also, some hospitals, I know you can join their POACs or PFACs or whatever they call them, their advisory councils. Sometimes they'll let kids. So if they're trying to make a difference within the hospital, that might be a meaningful place where you could, interact locally and try to make change.
I saw a very interesting question about having no personal connection to childhood cancer. How to start advocating even though you don't have that personal connection. And I had a wonderful experience with one of our advocates, Lou, who's from Western Pennsylvania. He's not been touched by childhood cancer, thankfully, but as a father himself, he knew that if any of his kids got sick, he would want someone standing up for them. And we talked a little bit about, his advocacy work, despite not coming directly from this community, feeling that passion to stand up and and speak for these families, the most important thing for him was listening and understanding the journey and understanding everyone's personal experiences, so that when he did get in front of folks like Eric and Nick, he could effectively communicate what the problem was and these stories that have been told to him. So I don't think you have to have a personal connection to this. All of us that have been touched by this awful disease need allies that can empathize with what we've gone through and effectively communicate to these policymakers that things need to change, or we need support from folks like them. So you don't have to have a personal connection. I think you just have to understand that there is a problem and want to help fix it. I also, I saw someone ask about putting advocacy work on their resume and how do you prove that? I think, just going out and doing the work and finding a way to advocate is important. Just going out and working with organizations like PBTF to find an effective way to make your voice heard, and clearly explaining that to folks, like, this is something I'm passionate about, and here are examples of what I've done. I think people then understand a little bit more about you and your work ethic and what you care about. So I think, hopefully no one's asking you to prove that you've done advocacy work on behalf of children's cancer charities, but if they do, and I've worked with you, I will get on the phone and vouch for you, I promise. I also saw a really interesting question from a medical professional. So we have done work with a number of medical professionals on our federal or on our state level initiatives, and I think it's very important for change makers, stakeholders, to hear from clinicians and medical professionals. Often they're hearing from patients or caregivers or family members, but I think it's a little bit more rare for them to hear from the actual care team and people that take care of these children. And it's incredibly effective when they hear from experts that can explain, again, very complex issues to them. So we work with professional organizations that from the medical professional space, and it's much more effective when we come in. We tell our personal story, and then clinicians can come in and explain the impact that some of these policies have on the way that they administer care. And drug shortages is another great example of this. It's helpful for people like Eric and Nick to hear stories about how this is impacting children's hospitals or the way that these clinicians are able to effectively carry out their job, because they can't know everything. Just like they said, they need helpful context and they need the problem explained to them so that they can effectively explain it to their boss or their colleagues from other offices. So I think offering up your expertise as a medical professional is incredibly important, and we've been very thankful for all of the medical professionals that have worked with us so far on our initiatives. I had another question here for either Eric or Nick. Do you have an example of effective communication from an advocate to your office, and and has an advocate come in and either changed their mind, or you've left a meeting thinking, wow, now I truly understand the problem?
Yeah, I could go first. Kind of what I mentioned before, doing the research ahead of time and understanding what the priorities of that member office is, and integrating, your agenda with my bosses. That's always very appreciated and helpful. So, like, for example, my boss He represents District 10, which is just right outside of Texas Children's Hospital. So we work a lot in partnership with that hospital. And also my boss is chairman of House Foreign Affairs, so there's always some type of international implication to everything that we do. And there's this one advocate who came and kind of understood that the context that, like we work with TCH. We also work with a lot of global health networks, and I don't want to go into like specific issues, but just being able to understand like this is what Mike McCaul cares about, and here's ways that their legislative priorities is able to help us and his priorities as well. And yeah, so it's just like, just for me, it was like, okay, this person knows where we're coming from, is helpful for us, provided us with a lot of helpful information. Even went so far as to say like, hey, like, you want to put out a tweet, like, here's like some messaging points. Here's some stuff that you guys could talk about with your constituents. Here's like 10 bullet points of like wins that you guys could talk about at town halls. Those are all like very helpful resource. And kind of like you said, there's just like, it's impossible for us to know everything. And so if you're able to provide as much context and information as possible, that's very helpful. There's hundreds and hundreds of issues that come across our desks. And so if you could find ways to just explain to us like why this is important, that's very helpful. And yeah, I'll just hand it off to Nick here.
I thought Eric said it well. And I think the other thing is every office, every congressional office, Senate office that you interact with is going to be different. And so I think having a flexibility about how to achieve your goals is always going to be important. Aligning it with the congressional member that you're talking to and their priorities, but also, if you're specifically advocating with a specific objective, whether it's, appropriations or a letter or something like that. Sometimes there's a variety of reasons which can be shared or not shared by the staffer as to why they can't do that. But thinking about other ways to achieve that goal of advocacy or pushing the needle or whatever you want to say to sort of make progress, I think can be really helpful. And also, I think help in sort of expectation setting that, if you're advocating for a specific bill or appropriations or letter or whatever it is, and one office reacts differently than another, not feeling like that's a negative, but trying to make progress. Sometimes just building a relationship and speaking to an issue is progress in and of itself. I'm sure it's been touched on prior to this, but congressional offices do have a lot of changeover, especially at the staff level. And so it's going to feel like you're telling the same thing over and over and over again. I've worked for Senator Grassley for 3 years and probably do 300 to 400 constituent meetings a year. And so even if I have met you before, continuing to tell your story and reminders is really important because I think, we're all very busy on both sides. You're advocating, you're busy, you have other things to do, day job and the challenges you're presented with. I think the other thing, I don't know if this totally fits into your question, Mike, but I just wanted to put this out there, particularly when it comes to advocacy, is obviously, if you can interact with the senator or the member of Congress on the House side, that is obviously the best way to sort of advocate, but there are also other ways to advocate. Obviously, you're talking to Eric and myself. We're staffers who are based in Washington, D.C., tend to be focused on the policy side of things. And every office is a little bit different, but I think it's true that most members of Congress and senators have state staff as well, who are based in the state, based in the congressional district. They may not be as policy deep, but they're also there to build relationships and connect with the right policy staff in Washington. And so even if you can't come out to Washington, D.C., there's a tremendous opportunity, whether the senator is running around Iowa, for example, and doing his 99 county tour and there's town halls available, or one of the 5 offices, there's plenty of opportunity to interact and build those relationships because you're probably going to be advocating a lot longer than some of the individuals you're even interacting with, including a senator or a member of Congress is going to be in their position. And so building those relationships is really helpful.
And I'd also point out, I do think it's important to be well researched before you step into these offices. Oftentimes, everyone has limited bandwidth and limited time. So you'll need to explain issues that, I keep saying it, are complex in a very short amount of time. So I think being well researched and accurate when you talk to staffers or legislators is key. And I'd say that one of the other things is showing appreciation. We have champions both in the Senate and the House that for years have pushed meaningful reforms that have helped families. And understanding the track record of the office that you're speaking to, I think, is also important. If you've benefited or you appreciate what they've done, express that to them so they understand that they are making a difference. With the Give Kids a Chance Act and the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act, they were previously introduced. So you should also better understand if your representative or senator has already supported a bill. Yes, it might be new. It might have just been introduced last week, but your rep or senator might have co-sponsored the previous version and is still in support of that bill. So just because something is introduced and your senator or rep are not on as a co-sponsor immediately doesn't mean that they don't support the bill. So it's important to understand the history of what you're lobbying for as well. I had another question here, a couple questions actually that are less appropriate for me to answer, but more for our family support team. We had what resources are available to parents regarding more information of their child's diagnosis, treatment, and care, and how do I find out more about long-term support and care post-treatment? Our family support team is incredible. My wife and I have personally taken advantage of our resources. I would encourage anybody that is looking for resources or help, either during diagnosis or afterwards, through survivorship, through bereavement. Our family support team does an incredible job, and all of our contact information will be put up at the end. So I encourage you to reach out to one of our family support folks if you need that help, and they can answer those questions for you. I think this is an interesting question for Curtis and Colin, and I can even offer my own experience, but we had a question about how to control your emotions when thinking about, telling your story or talking to other folks about what you've gone through. Curtis and Colin, how have you dealt with preparing yourself to share that story and trying to deal with your emotions as you go through retelling what you've been through?
Well, it's kind of a hard question to answer, in a sense that what I want to say is yes, and how you present the story and how you present is important to get people to really understand it and take it in. But at the same time, I want to say that it's such a strong connection that people will make by hearing that story, that I want to say, don't control your emotions. And I say that not to go out and be rude to people or to break people down because they don't understand or they're able to sympathize with your situation because they don't know. And we specifically tell people when they say, we don't know how you do it, we say, we don't want you to know. We don't want you to understand how we feel. We just want you to listen. So I say the emotional side of it is important. Sharing your child's story and sharing the journey that it is a family diagnosis, sharing that how everybody handles it and is able to cope with it or move forward with their daily life is important to put the emotion onto it. Which a lot of times, we post updates. I'm sure we've all done it on Facebook, what's going on in the hospital or with treatment or, but you can't put emotion to that. You can't attach anything to it, and emojis don't do it. So when you're going into these offices, like my wife and I have done several times in Madison, and you're going into the senators and representative offices, there's emotion there, and you have to show that emotion. You have to let them know that you're a real person, and our daughter was a real person that mattered, and she should have been heard, and she should have been taken care of. And the people that we need to make the change are the ones that aren't currently listening to us. And we as parents and as advocates are shouldering all the weight of all of this change. We are the ones carrying it all. And if I could write the bills today, I would do it. If I could run for office and if I thought it would make a difference, I would do it. But I feel like I'm better suited to be on the outside, gaining support to go and do more of this. So I think you have to tell it with passion. You have to give your children the words and the emotions that they deserve to have their stories told. So don't hold back, but be respectful, because at the same time, it's like a telemarketer. If you're yelling at them, they're not listening to what you're saying. They're just blowing it off and you're another call. If you go in with passion and you tell your story, and if it gets heated, you have to just know how to bring it back, but understand they're the people you're speaking to are the ones that are going to pass your story along. And if you don't respect them, they're not going to hear you and they're going to shut it off.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, Curtis, I think what you said about when you're yelling and screaming, nobody's listening. Yeah, I find it's much more effective to say like, hey, Nick, Senator Grassley, passed legislation that's been really meaningful to my family. And you and your work are making huge change in my life. And I'm very grateful. And here's another way I think we can move forward and make even more change. But to try to find a way that somebody you're working with has already made some great progress, because so much has already been done. And rather than putting somebody on the defensive to say like, this hasn't been done, to find a way to say, your work makes a difference in my life. And this is how we can work together to move forward. Maybe gets people enthusiastic to work together rather than feeling like they're attacked.
Yeah, and I'd add, I think in preparing to tell your story and kind of relive some of those more difficult moments, I just make sure that I prepare beforehand. I prepare myself for the emotions that might come up when I start talking about my daughter and what she went through. And I make sure that I'm well researched so that I can get the message across, even if I do get emotional. And I'm sure Eric and Nick will back me up here. It's okay to get emotional in these meetings. This is a very emotional topic, and what we've gone through, what we've seen is it's difficult. And I do think there's a level of understanding from the folks that you're interacting with that this is a heavy emotional topic and something that people feel passionate about. So I don't think they're gonna turn off their listening just because you get emotional, and I think no one's going to blame you. It's part of this advocacy work. It is for me. But I think one of the important things is knowing when to take a step back and understanding, hey, this is maybe too much for me today. I don't know that I can do this. Maybe I'll approach it again at a later time. But right now, for me, emotionally, I can't. It's not something I can do, and that's perfectly fine. No one's going to force you to do this work. You should do what's best for you, best for your family. And you'll have an opportunity down the road to express what you want to express at the right time. So just take time for yourself. I had kind of one last question here to wrap things up, and it's for Eric and Nick. We're going into September. We're now kind of heading towards the end of the year. You both mentioned bills that are priorities for your office. What can advocates do to help ensure that these pieces of legislation have the their best shot at getting passed.
I can speak to the Accelerating Kids Access to Care. It's something Senator Grassley is leading here in the United States Senate. A comparable bill has been introduced in the House. I mean, I think one way to build, potential passage or continue to create some movement is building co-sponsors. Everyone's got 2 senators in their state and a certain number of House representatives, depending on where you are. But we're continuing to try to build co-sponsors for that bill. We've got about 15 or so, pretty evenly split Democrat and Republican. And so if your home state senator is not on Accelerating Kids Access to Care, reaching out to your senator or senators, depending on if they're co-sponsoring or not, co-sponsoring can be really helpful in building support for that bill, prioritizing it. A lot of things, particularly in healthcare, tend to happen in large packages or large bills. We call those omnibus or end of year packages. And so building co-sponsors is actually a really key way that leadership in both the House and the Senate, as well as committee leadership, know what are priorities. And so that's a really helpful vehicle.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to add to that. Co-sponsorship is very important. If it's not a priority of the committee, building momentum and support is one way to make it a priority for them. So if you're able to get as much off-committee support as possible, yeah, that's one thing that would be very helpful moving forward.
Great, and so PBTF has endorsed both the Accelerating Kids Access to Care and the Give Kids a Chance Act. If you want to know whether your senator or rep is a co-sponsor, I can help you with that. Reach out to me. We can also get you more information on both of those pieces of legislation and some talking points if you'd like to reach out to your legislators. And we're hopeful that both of those pieces of legislation will get a vote and pass before the end of the year. I think, as everyone has illustrated here, there are so many different ways to engage in advocacy, and we'd love to help you find your voice and find out ways that you could help others, your family, your friends, your patients. Feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to both of the offices that are represented here. Let them know that you appreciate the work that they're doing on the legislation that we've talked about. Talk to them about other legislation that you care about. And, but I just want to finish by expressing my gratitude to both Curtis and Colin for everything that they do for families like ours and all of the patients and family members that we serve. I think you're making a huge difference, and I'm glad to work alongside you. That's the end of our Q&A portion and our webinar. We will put up our contact information here at the end. Feel free to reach out to me or members of our family support team if you need those resources. And we just thank you for joining us on behalf of all of our panelists. We hope you have a great day, and thank you for attending. Bye, everyone.